Hi, I'm Elva. My sister once handed me a glass of wine at a family dinner, said it was special, made just for me, but something felt off. So I swapped glasses with her husband. What happened next exposed more than just a single betrayal. It uncovered a pattern of lies, control, and years of being erased from my own family. They tried to make me look unstable. They tried to take my father, my place, my name. But what happens when the quiet one decides not to stay quiet anymore? Would you stay silent if your own sister wanted you gone? I stood at the edge of the dining room, clutching a bottle of wine I knew wouldn't impress anyone here. The crystal light above the table shimmered like it had something to prove. Marla's house had that curated warmth you see in magazines. Plenty of autumn tones, but not a single real feeling in the air. It was Thanksgiving week, and I had been invited more as a formality than as family. "Look who finally made it," Marla chirped, walking toward me in her pressed linen dress and glass-perfect smile. She kissed the air near my cheek, not even pretending anymore. "Everyone, this is my little sister, Elva. She's experimenting with writing now. You know how creatives are." I didn't smile. I nodded. The words experimenting and little were deliberate. She didn't even realize how often she played that same record. Or maybe she did, and that was the point. Either way, I'd learned long ago that some insults are meant to sound like compliments, and some people wrap their cruelty in a tone sweet enough to rot your teeth. I placed the wine bottle on the table next to two others already opened. No one would touch mine. I wasn't offended. I hadn't brought it for them. Dale, her husband, nodded at me from across the room. He looked tired, like his suit was one size too heavy for him. He was always polite, but never really present. I couldn't decide if he was quietly rebelling or quietly disappearing. I scanned the room. Her colleagues from the foundation were there, as were some family friends I hadn't seen in years. Mr. Rooker, our father, sat at the head of the table, looking more like a guest of honor than the man who'd once carried me on his shoulders through the old farmer's market. Dinner began promptly, of course. Everything in Marla's world did. During the appetizers, she shared a story about how she once managed a fundraising crisis during a snowstorm. Everyone laughed at the right time. I chewed slowly, smiled when expected. My father praised her initiative. He barely asked how my writing was going. Marla stood and tapped her fork gently against her glass. "Before we get into dessert," she said, "I have something special." She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with two wine glasses on a separate tray. "This one's just for you," she said, handing one directly to me. "Special mix. You'll love it." Her voice was almost too warm. Her eyes, though, darted, just slightly, to see if anyone was watching. I stared into the glass. A faint shimmer floated at the top. It wasn't bubbles. It wasn't sediment. It was something off. I didn't hesitate. She turned her back for a moment to set the second glass down in front of Dale. That's when I swapped them, smooth, without flair. Years of being ignored teaches you how to move without being seen. Dale reached for the glass that was meant for me. I kept mine untouched. Across the table, Marla sat down slowly, watching Dale with too much interest, masked as casual glances. I sipped water instead. During the next half hour, the tension thinned out, or maybe I just got used to the weight of it. My father told a story about the first time he met my mother. Everyone laughed, including Marla. I noticed she always laughed a beat too early, like she wanted to own the moment before anyone else could. Dale picked at his food, rubbing his temple now and then. His face had lost color. I could feel something shifting, but said nothing. "You all right?" Marla asked him. That same voice, half care, half performance. I just need some air," he said, his voice strained. But he didn't stand. He started coughing, first lightly, then as if something was stuck. Marla leaned toward him. "Dale?" He doubled over. Sweat formed above his brow. A low groan escaped his lips. Then he jerked back in his chair and reached for the edge of the table. Someone stood up. "Should we call?" "Dale!" Marla said louder this time, touching his arm with urgency, but not once looking at me. Not once. The dining room exploded in voices and motion. I sat still, hands folded. I watched. I listened. And for the first time that night, I didn't feel like the outsider. Because I knew exactly what had just happened. She hadn't made that drink for her husband. She made it for me. And in that moment, I knew. She didn't just want to humiliate me. She wanted to erase me. Dale's chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor as his body slumped forward. The panic that followed came in waves. First gasps, then chairs being pushed back, glassware clinking from a nearby buffet, and a voice I didn't recognize shouting, "Somebody call 911!" Marla froze for a beat. Her hand hovered over Dale's shoulder, fingers spread like she wasn't sure whether to steady him or distance herself. And still, she didn't look at me. Not once. Not even as Dale let out a low guttural sound and doubled over, clutching his stomach. Guests darted toward him. Others pulled out their phones. One of Marla's colleagues, Bethany, I think, had already started listing symptoms out loud, like she was narrating a courtroom deposition. Sweating, pale skin, erratic pulse. Meanwhile, I sat back, still and silent, hands folded in my lap. I didn't offer help. I didn't panic. I watched. I waited. And I memorized the moment her face began to crack. It wasn't concern. Not for Dale. It was calculation. Real-time damage control flickering across her features like a faulty light bulb. She kept her voice calm, directing people toward cold water, instructing someone to check for an EpiPen in Dale's coat pocket. It was all an act, and I wasn't the only one who saw it. "He's had shrimp dozens of times," a man across the table said, shaking his head. "This ain't no allergy." I didn't turn toward the voice. I kept my eyes on Marla, who smiled too tightly and said, "Yes, but you never know with these things. Sometimes people develop new sensitivities." Sensitivities. That's what she called it. Dale was groaning louder now, one hand gripping the edge of the table, while the other hung limply at his side. And yet, Marla still didn't show fear, just frustration that the script had gone off track. Minutes passed, or maybe they dragged. I can't tell. Eventually, the paramedics arrived and Dale was wheeled out, barely able to speak. I caught a brief glimpse of his eyes. They were bloodshot, confused. He never looked at me either, but something about the way he avoided my gaze told me he knew. The guests started to leave not long after. Polite murmurs filled the room, but no one lingered. Everyone had an excuse to get back to their car, their dinner, their children. It's amazing how quickly people vanish when the air shifts from celebratory to suspicious. I waited until the front door had closed behind the last guest before standing. The kitchen was clean. Of course it was. Not a trace of disarray, not even a dropped napkin or a wine ring on the counter. But I knew what to look for. Tucked neatly behind the sink was a second wine glass, untouched. I reached for it slowly, my hand steady, my breath measured. The rim still carried the faint shimmer I'd noticed earlier. I held it up toward the pendant light and caught the smallest film resting on the surface, like oil, but clearer. Carefully, I wrapped it in a linen napkin from the drawer and slid it into the tote bag I'd brought. I took a photo with my phone before I did, just in case. You only need to lie once to make someone question everything you've ever said. But if you're lucky, they leave the evidence behind when they're sloppy. Or too confident. I stepped out onto the back patio, letting the air hit my face, cooler now with nightfall just beginning to settle. The garden lights were already on, bathing the landscaping in soft yellows. Marla liked to show things off in layers, inside elegance, outside perfection. But it all masked the same thing: control. Dale once said that during a dinner party at their house, months ago. I'd complimented the table setting, and he'd chuckled, barely above a whisper. "Marla likes things controlled, even family." He'd said it like a joke, but his eyes hadn't laughed. Now I understood. Tonight wasn't about sibling rivalry or petty jealousy. It wasn't even about making me look bad. No, this was strategy. And if Dale hadn't taken that drink, I would have been the one in that stretcher, rolling out the front door to a chorus of well-rehearsed concern. I glanced through the glass back doors, watching Marla clear the plates with clinical efficiency. Her hands moved with the same grace they always did, but she moved faster now, sharper. She was cleaning up, not just the table, but the narrative. Too late. I took one last look at the glass, glowing faintly from inside my tote. It wasn't just a drink, it was proof. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't the one who'd have to explain herself. I walked out of her house that night with more than just suspicion. I walked out with proof. Back at home, I didn't turn the lights on right away. I needed a second to let the silence settle in. Something about it felt more honest than anything I'd just walked away from. I slipped off my shoes by the door, dropped my keys into the small ceramic bowl by the entry table, and placed the napkin-wrapped glass inside the freezer. I didn't know how long I'd keep it there. I just knew it needed to stay cold, untouched, and unwashed, like a truth that hadn't been tampered with. I made coffee even though I wouldn't drink it. The ritual calmed me. While the kettle hissed, I sat at my desk. The glow of my laptop blinked like it had been waiting for me. I opened the draft of the speech I was supposed to deliver next week, something about caregiving, grief, and resilience, but all the words looked like someone else had written them. They felt sterile now, like they were written by the version of me Marla had helped create. Compliant, small, unthreatening. I minimized the document and clicked open a folder I hadn't touched in years. Old correspondence, Jesse. The name alone made my chest tighten, but I didn't pull away. I scrolled until I found it. His final message, dated March 15th, 2017. Elva, I can't do this. You don't trust people. You twist conversations. You make everything about your trauma. I need peace. I need someone who doesn't live in a shadow. That was how it ended. No fight, no explanation. Just a cold signing off from a man who once traced poetry along my collarbone with his fingers. I'd read that email dozens of times before, trying to convince myself he was right. That maybe I had been too much, too damaged. But this time, something about it hit differently. The phrasing felt off, like he was responding to something I never said. I read it again, slower, and then it clicked. That winter, weeks before Jesse pulled away, I'd gotten a strange voicemail from an unknown number. I hadn't saved it, but I remembered the words almost perfectly. You don't deserve someone like Jesse. You're going to ruin him. He doesn't need your broken parts. At the time, I'd assumed it was someone from his side. Maybe an ex, a jealous friend. But now, sitting here with my stomach still knotted from the night before, that voice came back to me with chilling clarity. It wasn't a stranger's voice. It was Marla's. She hadn't just taken Jesse from me. She had whispered poison into his ear the same way she'd tried to slip it into my glass. The kettle whistled sharply, slicing through my thoughts. I turned it off, letting the steam rise and fade into nothing. I reached for the wooden chest on the bookshelf. My mother's journals were in there, sealed with an old leather strap. I hadn't opened them in years. I wasn't sure if I'd find what I was looking for, but something told me she'd seen this coming. Maybe not this exact moment, but the storm building behind my sister's smile. I flipped through pages until one caught my eye. A half-written entry, the handwriting rushed and angled. Marla always resents how Elva shines without trying. The words hit hard, not because I didn't believe them, but because deep down, I always had. Mom never said it aloud, but she must have known. She'd watched Marla sharpen her edges over the years, always needing to be the one who fixed, solved, managed. I was the mess that refused to stay in her lines. I turned the page. I wish I knew how to protect them both from each other. There was no punctuation, no closure, just that. Like even in her final reflections, our mother didn't know how to untangle the weight between us. She didn't choose sides. She just carried both burdens in silence. I rested my hand on the journal, letting the weight of those words anchor me. My mother had tried. Quietly, gently, but she hadn't been able to stop it. That's when I realized Jesse was never the one that got away. He was just another page Marla had edited. I closed the journal and leaned back in my chair. My apartment was still, the kind of stillness that only comes after you stop looking for answers and start gathering evidence. She hadn't just sabotaged my life, she rewrote it, line by line, like it was hers to edit. By the time I left my apartment 2 days later, the air outside had that crisp clarity that only comes after a cold front. I hadn't planned on meeting Marla, but she'd texted me that morning. Want to grab coffee? Just us. No tension, no punctuation, no emojis. She always kept her digital tone as composed as her real one. I arrived 10 minutes early at the cafe she picked. Neutral ground. Not one of her usual haunts, but not a hole in the wall either. Asheville had no shortage of quaint places where people smiled at you without meaning it. I chose a seat near the corner, not too exposed, but close enough to overhear the entrance if I had to. While I waited, I stirred my tea, more out of habit than taste. That's when I heard it. Her voice drifting from behind me, soft and familiar, but with that edge she only used when she thought no one was watching. She's always been fragile, Marla said. You know, dramatic. She just needs supervision, not attention. I didn't turn around. I didn't even blink. Her voice was aimed at someone sitting across from her. Probably another one of her foundation friends or a mutual acquaintance she trusted. But I knew the tone. It was the one she used when she wanted people to believe they were helping her manage a crisis. Me, of course, without realizing they were just being recruited. I pulled out my phone, one tap, and it started recording audio. She's unpredictable, Marla continued, laughing a little like it pained her to say it. Honestly, I've been looking into guardianship options, just in case, for Dad and maybe later. The woman she was speaking to murmured something, but I didn't catch it. My ears were ringing. When Marla finally walked in and spotted me minutes later, she was all smiles and calm eyes, as if she hadn't just labeled me a liability behind my back. You beat me here, she said, setting her bag down. That's rare. I nodded. I didn't say anything about what I'd just heard. I didn't ask who she'd been speaking to. I just let her sit down and sip her overpriced latte, like we were sisters having a casual afternoon chat. We talked about nothing. Her work, a recent donation gala, the weather. The entire conversation felt like an echo of something once sincere but now hollow. I smiled. I nodded. And when she left, I didn't hug her goodbye. That night, I sat on my couch, laptop open, legal databases loaded. Probate court records weren't always simple to navigate, but persistence has always been one of my better traits. And there it was, filed under her name, request for temporary and permanent guardianship. Rooker, Robert A. I clicked. The language was worse than I'd expected. She'd painted a portrait of me as emotionally unstable, irrational, incapable of participating in decisions concerning our father's health or estate. Phrases like history of mental fragility and prone to erratic behavior jumped off the screen. There were no medical notes, no letters of support, just her signature and her narrative. I printed the document and highlighted every line that weaponized my silence, every carefully constructed sentence that made me out to be someone who needed to be kept out of the way. The next morning, I drove to the assisted living center where our father had moved into months ago. It wasn't a nursing home. It was upscale, private chef, manicured grounds, staff who called him Mr. Rooker, like he was still a man who gave orders, and not just one who was looked after. The receptionist recognized me. You're Elva, right? I nodded. I'd like to see my father. There was a pause. She clicked a few things on her screen and looked slightly uncomfortable. Actually, Ms. Whalen submitted a restriction request last week. Something about minimizing emotional strain for him? I kept my face neutral. Could I get a copy of the visitor log from the last 2 weeks? She hesitated. I don't know if I can... I smiled. Don't worry, I'll have my lawyer ask. 10 minutes later, I had a photo of the screen on my phone. Marla had visited 4 times, each entry logged precisely. Mine? Only once, 2 weeks ago, before the restriction. That wasn't coincidence. That was premeditation. I drove home without turning on the radio. I needed to think in silence. At my apartment, I laid everything out on the table: the audio file, the guardianship petition, the visitor log. I listened to Marla's voice again. How casually she rewrote me into someone fragile, someone inconvenient. She didn't just want to control Dad. She wanted to erase my voice, one legal form at a time. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I made a list: names, contacts, next steps, and I sent a message to someone who owed me a favor, someone who knew a judge. If Marla wanted guardianship, I'd let her plead for it in front of a courtroom full of people who wouldn't fall for her curated concern. She wants guardianship? She can have a courtroom instead. The next 3 days passed in that strange blur where your body functions, but your mind never quite lands. I checked things off my list, followed up with the court contact, sent over documentation, set reminders to call Dad's lawyer. And still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. When Marla made a move, she never just made one. On the third morning, I was rinsing a mug when my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A few seconds later, it rang again. Same number. Against better judgment, I answered. "Elva Rooker?" a man's voice asked. "I'm Dr. Michaels, your father's general practitioner." I shifted the phone to my other ear, suddenly alert. "Yes, this is she. I wanted to touch base regarding an email we received. Anonymous, but fairly detailed. It claimed you've been showing erratic behavior and may pose a risk to your father's safety." I didn't speak for a full beat. It referenced personal history, mood instability, impulsive tendencies, even implied there were prior incidents. "Do you have a copy?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "I can forward it, but you should know it was vague enough to avoid direct slander." Still, given its tone and context, I felt obligated to reach out. "Thank you," I said. "Please send it. And if anything else like this comes through, I want to know." He hesitated. "Is there something I should be aware of?" "I think you're already starting to see it." An hour later, the email hit my inbox. It came from a generic Gmail, no signature, no details I hadn't already guessed. But the phrasing, it was unmistakably hers. "Elva's emotional volatility has always been a concern in our family. As her sister, I've tried to support her, but now with Dad's health declining, I worry she might act out of misplaced stress or resentment." Out of all the tools in Marla's arsenal, this one cut the deepest. She wasn't just trying to keep me away. She was reshaping the way others saw me. Quietly, methodically. I stared at the screen, jaw set, until the letters blurred. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything, but I saved the file, labeled it Weapon 1. That night, I sat in bed scrolling through the family group chat. It had been unusually quiet lately, and something about that felt off. I refreshed the thread and saw it. A new one. Rooker family, updates. Photos filled the screen. Dale, resting in a hospital bed, giving a weak thumbs up. A selfie with Marla at his side. A caption. "He's recovering well. Thanks for the prayers." Every cousin, aunt, and church family friend was tagged. All smiles and emojis. Except I wasn't there. I scrolled to the top. My name wasn't even on the list. She didn't block me. She just left me out. And no one said a word. Not one person noticed I was missing. The next morning, I walked into Marla's office without an appointment. The receptionist looked startled, but I didn't stop. Her glass office door was half open, and she glanced up just as I stepped in. "Elva, what?" I dropped a folder on her desk. She looked down at it, expression unreadable. "What is this?" "An email you wrote, and a group thread you built to bury me." "Elva, you didn't want to kill me with poison. You wanted to erase me with reputation." Marla sat back in her chair, folding her arms. "You've always been dramatic. I'm just protecting what's left of this family." Her voice was steady, calculated, like she was talking to a donor, not a sister. You're not protecting anyone, I said, leaning in. You're rewriting the story so no one remembers I was ever part of it. She didn't respond. You think being quiet makes you safe. It doesn't. It just makes you mistaken for a savior. Marla's jaw flexed, but she kept that professional calm painted across her face. I didn't give her the satisfaction of slamming the door when I left. I walked out the same way I'd walked in, deliberate, quiet, and with a plan. Back at my apartment, I opened the folder on my laptop labeled Strategy. I added 2 new files. Weapon 2, Email Smear. Weapon 3, Social Erasure. I wasn't interested in proving her wrong anymore. I was going to show everyone who she really was. She could keep pretending I was unstable, irrelevant, invisible. But I had the receipts. This time, the story won't be written by her lies. It'll be printed in court filings. The next morning, the sky was overcast. Thick, unmoving clouds hung low, like they'd been told to stay put. I sat at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, the kind of bitter I usually avoided. But I needed the edge. My laptop was already open. I stared at the folder labeled Strategy, took a breath, and opened another file. The one Dale had quietly shared with me 3 weeks ago. He hadn't said much when he sent it. Just a short message. If something ever happens, you'll need this. I clicked the link. The screen loaded with a low-resolution video, security footage from Marla's kitchen, the same night she'd hosted that lovely little dinner in her curated colonial home. The clip didn't need sound to tell its story. She stood at the counter, back to the camera, glass in one hand, a small vial in the other. She didn't even flinch when she tipped the contents in, gave it a light stir, and scanned the hallway. Nothing about her moved like someone acting on impulse. Every motion was precise, familiar. I paused the video at the frame where the shimmer hit the surface of the wine. Proof. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't damning in a courtroom drama way. But it was enough. Enough to cast doubt. Enough to say, look again. I uploaded the file to a private drive, locked it behind a password, and copied it to 2 separate flash drives. One went into the bottom of my purse. The other I slid into the lining of an envelope I'd already addressed to someone in legal counsel I trusted. No monologue, no dramatic labeling, just insurance. By midday, I'd showered, dressed in soft black layers that made me feel less observed, and drove to Dad's house. I hadn't been there in a few weeks, not since Marla had begun cutting off my visits. But this trip wasn't to see him. Not yet. I let myself in using the old code he never bothered to change. The house smelled like lemon wood polish and something else. Marla's favorite fig-scented candles. She never cared if he liked them. His study was mostly untouched. I walked past the pictures of us from childhood, the one of Marla and me at a school play, cropped to hide the part where I'd slipped and fallen just before the curtain rose. On the bookshelf, tucked between 2 atlases, sat the antique edition of Hemingway's short stories I'd given Dad for his birthday last year. Leather-bound, gold lettering, personal. I pulled it gently from the shelf, opened the front cover, and read the inscription. To Dad, from your loving daughter, Marla. I didn't need to feel the sting in my gut. I'd expected it. What I hadn't expected was the subtle crease in the spine that matched how I wrapped it. The smudge near the edge of the page that looked exactly like the ink I'd used. I pulled out my phone, laid the book flat on the desk, and took a close-up photo of the inscription. Then I scrolled back to my receipt, which I'd kept like a small rebellion, and snapped that too. Evidence. Quiet. Clean. I didn't say goodbye to Dad. He was still out with the home nurse for his walk, and part of me didn't want to interrupt that rare pocket of peace. I just left the book where it was, knowing now what it meant. Marla hadn't just tried to steal the narrative. She'd begun erasing the footnotes. Late that afternoon, I pulled into the parking lot of the financial firm where our family's advisor, Mr. Harwick, still worked part-time despite his age. I'd asked for a meeting, told him it was about updating Dad's documents. Marla arrived 5 minutes after me, immaculate as always, expression unreadable. Dad was already inside, waiting patiently, legs crossed, cane beside him. He didn't say much these days, but his presence still held weight. Mr. Harwick welcomed us, offered bottled water, then gestured to the long table in the conference room. "Thank you both for coming. I understand you wanted to discuss the estate distribution?" "Correct," I said. I reached into my tote, pulled out 2 folders, and placed them in front of him. "Let's start with this." I opened the first folder. Inside, photographs. One of the book, one of the forged inscription, one of the receipt. And this. I opened the second. A still frame of Marla's hand holding the vial over my glass. No one spoke. Marla leaned forward, studied the images. Her face didn't move, but her fingers curled slightly over the table's edge. I didn't explain, not right away. "Finally," I said, "if anyone here thinks this is about money, they've never been the child who watched their name vanish from their own story." Dad looked at me. For the first time in a while, his eyes didn't seem distant. They held recognition. And something else, regret. Mr. Harwick cleared his throat. "Given this, I believe we should revisit the distribution terms of the estate." Marla's jaw tightened. She gave a short, practiced smile. "You want a war?" I shook my head. "No, just the truth. And I'm not the one who's afraid of it." I didn't stay for the rest of the meeting. I'd said what needed to be said. My part was done, for now. For the first time, I wasn't defending myself. I was making her explain. 2 days after the confrontation in Harwick's office, I found myself sitting in the county records building, tapping my pen against a clipboard I hadn't needed in years. There's something oddly sterile about those kinds of places. White walls, faded posters, about property taxes, air that smells like paper that's been sitting too long. But I wasn't there for nostalgia. A line from Mom's journal had been bothering me, looping back over itself in my head like a scratch on a vinyl record. She only feels safe when she's in control. She'd been writing about Marla, of course, though she never named her outright. That's the thing about our mother. She never pointed fingers. She documented. Quietly, thoughtfully, like someone preparing a trail of breadcrumbs. I followed them. A clerk named Rachel, probably in her late 20s, helped me dig through archived files. She had green nails and a wedding ring that looked too tight. "You're looking for anything filed before the current guardianship, correct?" she asked, sliding manila folders across the counter with a kind of practiced efficiency. "Yes," I said. "Anything under Robert A. Rooker. And if there's anything handwritten or notarized, especially supplemental clauses, I'd like to see those." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. After 20 minutes, she returned holding a thin packet, dust at the edges. "Found something you might want to take a look at. Not digitized yet, too old. Dated 8 years ago." I opened it carefully. Tucked near the back was a folded addendum. Handwritten, signed, and unmistakably in my mother's handwriting. Addendum C, upon incapacity clause. Should any heir assume undue control over another, the estate is to be redistributed, favoring the disenfranchised. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until my chest reminded me to start again. I scanned the page twice more, then asked for certified copies, and thanked Rachel with a handshake firmer than I expected from myself. It was mid-afternoon by the time I pulled into the driveway of a modest ranch home on the east side of town. The shutters were peeling, but the lawn was neatly trimmed. I knocked once and waited. The door opened to reveal Mr. Lawton, retired attorney, former partner in Dad's old firm, and one of the few people my mother had trusted with anything. "Elva," he said, surprised. "Well, haven't seen you since. Goodness, high school maybe?" I smiled faintly. "I'm hoping you can help me answer something only you'd know." He stepped aside without asking what it was. Inside, I laid the addendum on his coffee table. His face shifted from nostalgia to something more serious as he read. "She asked me to notarize that personally," he said, voice low. "She didn't want anyone else in the office handling it. Did she say why?" He nodded slowly. "She said, and I quote, 'I love both my daughters, but one of them will mistake control for protection. And if that happens, this needs to speak louder than I can. I looked away for a second, blinking more than I needed to. She asked me not to file it unless the estate came under conflict. He added. It has, I said simply. He handed the document back, then signed an affidavit without hesitation. You didn't hear this from me, but you're doing the right thing. On the drive home, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt solid, like I was carrying a weight that belonged to more than just me now. Back at the apartment, I laid out everything on my living room table. Footage of Marla with the glass. Photos of the Hemingway book with the wrong inscription. A copy of the anonymous email to Dad's doctor. Screenshots of the group text I'd been silently cut from. And now, the notarized clause from Mom's hand. I labeled the folder Contingency and sent a secure copy to my attorney. Then, I picked up the phone and made the call I'd been putting off. Hi, this is Elva Rooker. I'm requesting an emergency hearing to petition for independent supervision of my father's estate. No emotion in my voice, just facts. It was the kind of calm that doesn't come from peace, but from certainty. By early evening, my phone buzzed. A text from Dale. Dale. She hasn't said a word to anyone since your meeting. That usually means something's brewing. Just, don't be alone at the board dinner next week. I stared at the message for a while, then typed back, I won't be. This time, I'm walking in with every truth she's tried to bury. I turned off my phone, stood in front of the window, and watched as the last of the day slipped behind the mountains. She buried the clause. I'm about to unearth the consequences. The night of the banquet arrived with an almost eerie calm. The sky had cleared by late afternoon, but the crispness in the air hinted at change. I dressed with quiet precision. Black dress, pearl earrings, a neutral expression I'd practiced in the mirror. The USB drive was tucked neatly in a side pocket of my purse, alongside a spare if things went sideways. Not that I planned for chaos, but I knew better than to expect anything else when Marla was involved. The event was held at the Central Hall downtown, a grand, high-ceilinged venue used for charity dinners and political fundraisers. I arrived 15 minutes before the program started. Just enough time to be seen but not studied. Dale spotted me across the room. He gave a slow nod. No smile. But that was more than I needed. Inside, the place was filled with people I didn't recognize. Friends of the family, colleagues, benefactors of Marla's foundation. There were name tags and floral centerpieces, and a large projector screen hovering above the stage like a quiet witness. My father sat near the front, wheeled in earlier by an aide. He looked alert tonight, more present than I'd seen him in weeks. I walked over and touched his shoulder gently. He looked up, and when he saw me, something in his eyes softened. No words, just a small nod. That was enough. Marla took the stage not long after. She wore a champagne-colored dress, hair perfectly styled, her voice warm and deliberate as she welcomed everyone. Tonight is not about me, she began, which usually meant it would be. It's about a man who taught us the value of resilience, of doing the right thing, even when no one's watching. There were slides, of course, a perfectly curated trip through our childhood. Marla's piano recitals, family vacations, holidays, award nights. My face flickered in exactly 2 photos, once as a toddler and once standing blurry in the background of a beach shot, holding a towel. Not one mention of my name, not once. Applause came easily when she finished, the kind of clapping you do out of habit. And just as the MC moved to take back the mic, I stood. I was asked to say a few words, I said calmly. I hope that's still all right. The room quieted like someone had dropped the volume dial. A few turned to look at Marla. She froze. I didn't wait for her to answer. I stepped forward, removed the USB from my purse, and handed it to the technician off stage. Can you play this, please? The lights dimmed. The screen went black. Then it began. Marla at the kitchen counter, her hands moving with practiced ease, the vial, the wine glass, stirring, glancing over her shoulder. Next slide. An up-close photo of the Hemingway book, the inscription bearing her name, followed by the receipt I'd found, time-stamped with my signature. Then came the screenshots, the email smear, the private group text from which I'd been excluded, and finally, a scanned image of Addendum C. Our mother's handwriting, her signature, the clause she'd written years ago. Should any heir assume undue control over another, the estate is to be redistributed, favoring the disenfranchised. No narration, no music, just silence. And the truth. Marla stood up halfway through, walked toward the projector like she meant to stop it. But Dale, standing near the side of the room, gently stepped in her way. She didn't fight him. When it ended, there was no applause. Only stillness. The kind that doesn't ask for confirmation. Just acknowledgement. I turned toward my father. His eyes were glassy, hands trembling slightly in his lap. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You don't need to fix it," I said, voice low, meant for him alone. "You just need to see it." He nodded. And that was it. The evening unraveled quietly after that. No shouting, no grand gestures, just murmurs, people avoiding eye contact, slow exits under the weight of discomfort. Marla disappeared without saying goodbye. I watched her slip out a side door, heels clicking a little too fast. I stayed long enough to see the flowers on the table start to wilt. Near the buffet, my phone buzzed. National Conference Board. "We've moved your keynote to the primetime slot. Full broadcast confirmed." I stared at the message, letting it sink in. All that time, she'd tried to crop me out of the picture. But now I was the headline. I left the hall with my coat draped over my arm, walking slow through the cool night air. People glanced at me, some with sympathy, others with curiosity. But I kept my head level. Tomorrow, I speak to the world. But tonight, I spoke to the truth. 2 days later, I stood behind the curtain at the National Conference Hall in Washington, D.C., fingertips brushing the edge of a worn note card I didn't plan to read from. The room beyond was full, chairs lined with strangers and colleagues, local officials, and families who came not for me, but for something to believe in. It didn't matter. I wasn't here for applause. The stage manager gave me the nod. I stepped forward into the light. I adjusted the mic, inhaled slowly, and let the silence settle. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that clears a path. "I used to believe silence protected peace," I began, voice steady. "But now I know, it only protects power." There wasn't a flicker of movement in the room. "I'm not here to accuse anyone. I won't name names, but I want to talk about what happens when truth is treated like an inconvenience. When families function more like curated press releases than places to be known." I told them about my father, his quiet strength, the way he used to hum old hymns when he forgot the words to conversations, about how caregiving was more than medical schedules. It was about memory, dignity, forgiveness. I told them about being erased, not with force, but with omission, and how the most dangerous kind of betrayal often looks like protection on the surface. There were no dramatics, no raised voice, just truth, laid bare, moment by moment. When I finished, I stepped back, thanked them, and walked off stage without waiting for what came next. Behind the curtain, the coordinator squeezed my hand gently. "You didn't just speak," she said. "You echoed something half this room has lived through." By the time I made it to the lobby, I'd already received 2 messages. The first was from a woman I'd never met. Elderly, elegant handwriting in a note that read, "You said what many of us lived, but never had the words for. Thank you for finding them." The second was from Dale. "Dale, she won't admit it, but she heard you. And she's shaken." I didn't reply. There wasn't anything left to say. The next morning, I boarded a flight back to Asheville. I didn't check my email until I'd landed. Among the newsletters and work requests was a message from the estate court. I opened it on the tarmac, standing by the window. Subject: Final notice. Estate ruling body. Guardianship temporarily revoked. Independent fiduciary assigned. Ms. Weiland removed from legal authority over all estate matters. No headlines, no cameras. Just a quiet reversal. The kind of justice that doesn't need to be loud to be real. When I got home that evening, the apartment was still. I watered the plants, made tea, folded the throw blanket on the couch I never quite sit on properly. Life, it seemed, had found its edges again. Later, I heard a knock. I opened the door to find my father standing there with his cane and the aide a few steps behind. "I asked to stop here first," he said, "if it's all right." I stepped aside and let him in. He didn't stay long, just enough to look around the room, nod to himself, and hand me a worn envelope. Inside was an old photograph, me and Marla as kids, sitting on the porch, ice cream melting in our laps. But this wasn't the edited version she'd used for the slideshow. My face wasn't faded. I wasn't cropped. I was there, fully, freely. "I found the original," he said, "not the one she used." I sat down next to him, the photo in my lap. "I should have asked more questions," he said softly. "You shouldn't have had to," I answered. "But thank you." We sat there a moment longer. No need to say more. After he left, I placed the photo on the mantel. This story was never about poison. It was about being erased, about what it costs to stay silent when someone else is writing your ending. But not anymore, because this time I didn't ask to be seen. I became visible on my own terms. I didn't win. I just stopped losing to a version of me that never existed. Before we close this story, I want to share something personal, something I've only truly understood after living through every silent battle, every moment I was made to feel small, and every quiet victory that followed. If you've ever been made invisible in your own family, if someone close to you has tried to control your story, your reputation, or your place in the room, you're not alone. For a long time, I believed staying quiet meant keeping the peace. But the truth is, silence doesn't create peace. It creates space for others to rewrite your life, one omission at a time. And healing? It doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes, healing looks like choosing to speak, even if your voice shakes. Sometimes, it's choosing to no longer need their permission to exist fully. You don't have to shout to be powerful. You don't have to fight to be heard. You just have to stop letting someone else narrate your worth. So now, I ask you, have you ever been pushed to the edges of your own life by someone you love? Have you ever had to reclaim your name from someone who tried to redefine it? If this story resonated with you, even just a little, leave a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from. Type 1 if it touched your heart, or share your own experience. If it didn't connect with you, tell me why. I'd love to hear what you see from your side. We're here to listen, to share, and to grow. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and human, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Your voice matters. And no one gets to take that from you. Thank you for being here. Let's keep going, together. Hi, I'm Avis. You ever walk into a room and know, not just feel, know, you were never supposed to be invited? The day my father's will was read, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "Don't expect a penny." And then the lawyer reached for a second envelope. They'd erased me from the family on paper, just like they had in real life. But what they didn't expect was that my father had left behind more than money. What happens when the quiet daughter refuses to disappear? I got there early. Too early. The elevator was slow, humming like it had better things to do. I stood in front of the frosted glass doors of Atwood and Jameson Law, staring at the etched lettering, like it might spell out something different if I blinked twice. But it didn't. The truth never does. The receptionist looked up, startled. "You're Miss Delora?" I nodded. "I have a 9 a.m. appointment, reading of Howard Elrick's will." She motioned toward the hallway without smiling. "They're already inside." Of course they were. I walked down the corridor. the sound of my flats tapping against the floor, the only proof I belonged in that hallway. The conference room door was open. Inside, my mother and sister sat like they owned the oxygen in the room. Verlette wore navy, pearls, and a look of complete dismissal. Marla had that effortless suburban polish, lip gloss, silk blouse, and self-importance. They didn't stand. They didn't greet me. Instead, Verlette leaned back slightly in her chair, tilted her chin, and said, "Don't expect a penny, Avis. You're here for closure, not a check." It wasn't the words, it was the tone, the confidence of someone who believes the story has already ended. Clive Atwood stood by the window, stiff and neutral. He offered a polite nod, then gestured for me to sit. I pulled out the chair furthest from my mother, not because I was afraid, but because some things, like distance, are better preserved. Verlette reached into her leather folder and slid a set of papers across the table. "This is the will, signed, notarized, no surprises." She sounded proud, like presenting a math test she already knew she aced. Clive accepted it, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. Howard Elric, my father, had left everything to Marla. The house, the savings, even the old Buick that hadn't run since 2007. My name wasn't on a single line, not even in a footnote. Marla leaned forward slightly and offered a look that tried to mimic concern. "Avis, I'm sure it's what Dad thought was best. You know how he felt about structure and your lifestyle." I didn't flinch, didn't blink. I just looked at her and thought, you always did enjoy front row seats to someone else's undoing. I turned my eyes to the paper. Neat margins, legal language, a death sentence to presents. It wasn't just about the money, not really. It was about being deliberately left out of something I helped carry. I wasn't asking to be named first. I just didn't expect to be erased completely. Marla sipped her coffee like she was waiting for applause. Verlette crossed her arms and turned her attention to her phone. I reached into my canvas bag and pulled out my small black notebook. I didn't say anything, just opened to a fresh page and wrote a date. Then one word. Nothing. Clive's eyes caught the motion. His brow lifted, just enough for me to notice, and then he cleared his throat. "Miss Delora," he began, his voice firm but measured. "Before we proceed, I have a responsibility to ask if there is any objection." I met his eyes. "There is," Verlette scoffed. "Here we go." I didn't look at her. I looked at Clive. "That's not the only will, is it?" Clive's response came with a pause that was too long to be casual. His fingers moved toward the briefcase like they were remembering what he'd promised someone long ago. But before I could press, before anything new could unfold, the meeting wrapped up with a vague, "We'll reconvene soon." Verlette acted like it was a full victory. Marla, all smug grace, gathered her designer purse as if she'd just closed escrow on a mansion she'd inherited for being obedient. I left without another word. Outside, the air was thick. Georgia in spring never lets you forget where you are. I walked slowly to my car, not because I was tired, but because my body needed to catch up with my mind. And once I got in, once the door closed, and the world muted behind me, the silence hit harder than anything Clive could have said. I drove home on autopilot, turning the radio on just to have someone else's voice in the car. By the time I walked into my apartment, the daylight had faded into that strange blue-gray that doesn't quite feel like night yet. I dropped my bag by the door, kicked off my shoes, and stood in front of the gallery wall I never finished. 5 black frames. All empty. They weren't decorative. They were placeholders, reminders of what never made it onto the wall. No family pictures. No vacation snapshots. No, "Look how far we've come" moments. Just hollow rectangles collecting dust. I crossed the room, opened the cabinet beneath the TV, and pulled out the old shoebox I hadn't touched in years. It was labeled in my own handwriting, "Kept." Inside were things that didn't belong anywhere else. A clay magnet I made in 2nd grade, a hospital bracelet from when I broke my wrist climbing the magnolia in our front yard, and a stack of birthday cards I wrote to my father over the years. None of them ever sent. I held one from when I was 19. On the back, I'd scribbled, "I'm still here, Dad." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plea. Just a fact. Unspoken. Unacknowledged. It took me years to realize. I wasn't overlooked. I was never even considered. I sat on the couch, the box beside me, and let my eyes fall shut. The living room held a quiet that was familiar, but not friendly. And then the memories came, uninvited, but persistent. 15 years ago, Thanksgiving dinner. The family had gathered around the big table. Turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce that nobody touched. My uncle had brought his camera for the family photo. Verlette instructed everyone on where to stand. When it was time to take the shot, she looked at me and said, "Can you grab more chairs from the garage?" I remember hesitating. I remember thinking, this won't take long. But by the time I came back with the chairs, the camera had clicked, the photo taken, and the moment sealed. That framed picture hung in the hallway for years. I saw it every time I visited. 11 smiling faces, and not one of them was mine. I used to tell myself it didn't matter, that I didn't even like how I looked that year, that maybe I'd been blurry anyway. But you only lie to yourself when it's safer than the truth. And the truth? They never even noticed I wasn't in the frame. When you're excluded long enough, you stop looking for your seat at the table. You stand behind it, you serve it, and then you leave before dessert. A sharp knock pulled me back to the present. No one at the door, just the neighbor's kid slamming theirs shut again. I got up anyway, needing movement, and wandered into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water, but didn't drink it. Instead, I found myself drifting toward the window. Across the street, porch lights flicked on one by one. People inside laughed, clinked glasses, started dinner. Families doing regular things. Together. I turned away and picked up my phone. I scrolled aimlessly, not really reading, and then I paused on a photo. A picture from last month, posted by my sister. There she was, smiling at a brunch table, arms around Verlette. The caption read, "Grateful for the woman who taught me everything." Funny. She never taught me anything except how it feels to be used and dismissed. I remembered a different day, just a week ago. I'd stopped by Verlette's house to drop off some papers for Clive. She was on the porch, sipping iced tea with her neighbor. They didn't see me right away. The neighbor asked, "And your other daughter? She's still around?" Verlette didn't miss a beat. "Avis? Oh, she's still playing artist. You know how creative types are. Emotional, impractical. Never got a real job like Marla." That word stuck with me, still, like failure was a phase I refused to grow out of. I didn't interrupt. I just walked back to my car, closed the door, and let the words settle. Now, sitting in my apartment, I opened the drawer where I kept my brushes. I pulled out a canvas I hadn't touched in months. Not because I didn't know what to paint, but because I didn't know if it would matter. Tonight, it did. I stood the canvas on its easel, stared at it, and then I began to paint. Nothing elaborate, just something of mine. A soft field, an open sky, and when it dried, I framed it. Not for them, not for show, for me. The canvas stood drying on the easel when my phone buzzed the next morning. It was Clive, short and direct as always. "Come in," he said. "There's something that needs to be addressed before it's buried." I got dressed without much thought, threw on the same neutral blouse I wore to the first meeting, and headed out. The air was still damp from last night's rain, and the sidewalk glistened like it had secrets. By the time I reached the law office, the receptionist barely glanced up, just pointed toward the conference room. They were already there. Of course they were. Verlette in her powder blue suit, sitting upright like this was a campaign stop. Marla beside her, arms folded, lips pursed. I walked in without flinching, even as their eyes pinned me like I was the problem that refused to go away. Clive stood near the window, holding an envelope that looked different from the last one. Older, more personal. I could see the edge of handwriting on it, my father's. I didn't sit right away. I waited. He cleared his throat. This was delivered to me privately, 2 weeks before Mr. Elric's passing, Clive began. Sealed, witnessed, dated. Verlette didn't move. Marla shifted slightly, as if something in her tightened. Clive laid the envelope on the table. This is the updated will. For a few seconds, no one said anything. Then Verlette leaned forward. Howard didn't. He wasn't in any state to be. Clive didn't let her finish. He was evaluated for legal competence the day before this was signed. Documentation is included. He opened the envelope carefully, like it might dissolve if handled wrong. As he read, I focused on a scratch on the table, something small and harmless to anchor me. All assets, he said, including the residence on Cottonwood Avenue, savings held at First Southern, the boat slip at Lanier Creek, and the remaining 38% stake in Elric Hardware, are to be passed solely to Avis DeLaura. My name. He said my name. Marla made a choking sound, quickly masked by a cough. Verlette didn't look at me, but I saw her hand twitch, barely perceptible, curling against the edge of the table. Clive finished reading and placed the papers back into the envelope. Then he looked up. It is legally binding, fully enforceable. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I didn't feel victorious, just visible. Marla finally spoke. This is absurd. What's she going to do with any of that? She doesn't have kids. She's barely employed. Verlette added, Howard would never leave the business to someone who didn't even understand how it ran. I let them spiral. Clive waited for me to respond. I didn't ask for this, I said, keeping my voice steady. But he chose clarity in the end. Silence followed. Not awkward, not stunned, just quiet. The kind that settles after something finally lands where it's meant to be. Clive then reached into his briefcase again, this time pulling out a USB stick. There's one more thing, he said. He plugged it into the flat screen on the wall, turned the volume up slightly, and stepped back. My father appeared on the screen, older than I remembered, wearing the robe he used to fall asleep in when he watched late-night baseball. His voice was hoarse but strong. If you're watching this, he said, then I didn't get the chance to say it in person. That's my fault, like most things. He paused. The silence between his words said more than some people say in a lifetime. Avis, I made a lot of mistakes, but none bigger than letting you feel invisible. You weren't. I saw everything. I just didn't say it. He looked down, gathered himself, and continued. Your sister was always louder. Your mother, stronger. I assumed you didn't need me. But that wasn't true, was it? My chest tightened. I changed the will because it was the only way left to acknowledge you. Not because I wanted revenge on anyone else. Because I wanted you to have something with your name on it. He leaned back slowly in his chair. Forgiveness isn't something I can ask for. Not now. But if you ever find it in you, I hope this helps start that path. The video ended. The room didn't move. Verlette's eyes were fixed on the blank screen. Marla had gone pale. Clive turned off the monitor and stepped back to the table. This recording is time-stamped and stored on 2 independent drives, one submitted to the county clerk's office. It's real. It's protected. No one spoke. Finally, I stood, adjusted my sleeves, looked at the 2 women who had spent a lifetime telling me I didn't count. You edited me out of everything, I said, voice calm. But you forgot. I remember. Their silence didn't last. It never does. Verlette's voice cracked the air like glass underfoot. He wasn't in his right mind. You pushed him to this, Avis. The way she said my name, as if it was dirt on her tongue, did something strange to the room. Everything shifted. Clive looked up from the paperwork. Marla snapped her head toward me, and suddenly, the performance began. She was alone with him every day, Marla added quickly. You don't know what she said to him behind closed doors. Dad was vulnerable. He trusted her, and she took advantage of that. Clive held up a hand, calm but firm. Let's clarify something. Mr. Elric's attending physician signed a formal statement of mental capacity on the same day the updated will was executed. This wasn't some coerced document scribbled on a napkin. It was reviewed, witnessed, and legally filed. You're welcome to challenge it, but I assure you, it won't hold up. Marla's lips tightened. Oh, please. Of course, the doctor signed off, probably under pressure. People do favors all the time in this town, especially when money's involved. Verlet nodded in agreement. Howard was declining. He didn't even recognize his own grandchildren anymore, but suddenly he's coherent enough to disinherit his entire family? That word, family! They wielded it like a weapon, forgetting that it cuts both ways. I stayed seated. Still. But my hands rested on the arms of the chair like I was ready to stand if needed. I didn't flinch when they hurled their insults. I just waited. Then I spoke, calm and even. Is that the part where you wanted to put him in a home? Because he couldn't remember your kids? That stopped them. Marla's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Flashback. 1 year earlier, a late dinner at her house. The kids were screaming. Verletta was microwaving lasagna, and Howard was quiet, staring at a plant in the corner like he'd never seen one before. Marla had said between bites, honestly, it's getting exhausting. He doesn't even know who we are half the time. We should be looking into full-time care. I'd looked across the table at him. His eyes met mine. They were foggy, unsure. But I was there. He saw that. He knew. I'm not ready to be left somewhere, he'd whispered, barely audible. Nobody responded. Back in the conference room, I reminded them. You were ready to let him go before he was ready to leave. You said it, at that dinner. You called it a burden. Marla's jaw clenched. That's not fair. You don't have kids. You wouldn't understand how hard it is trying to juggle everything while also dealing with… Your father? I cut in. You mean dealing with your father? Verletta leaned in now, voice low, deliberate. Don't twist this, Avis. You isolated him. You made him feel like we'd abandoned him. No, I said. You did that yourselves. I just happened to be there when he noticed. Clive shifted in his seat, pulled out a final set of documents, and slid them across the table. We're done here for today. Avis, as per the updated will, your authority as executor is effective immediately. He handed me the folder. Verlette stared at it like it might explode. I stood slowly, took the papers with steady hands, and looked at both of them. Not with rage, not even pity, just certainty. If you plan to come for me again, I said, voice low but clear, bring something stronger than denial. I turned toward the door. Behind me, Marla muttered under her breath. This isn't over. She wasn't wrong. I stepped into the hallway, and Clive followed after a few seconds. We didn't talk as we walked to the elevator. He pushed the button, hands clasped in front of him. They're not used to losing, he finally said. They're not used to being challenged, I replied. He nodded. Brace yourself. They'll try again, but this time it won't be in person. He was right. What came next wasn't a confrontation. It was a strategy. Not words, but documents. Not voices, but signatures. Poison wrapped in paperwork. Clive didn't say anything as he locked the conference room door behind us. Just a nod toward the hallway and a quiet, follow me. We crossed through a side corridor I'd never noticed before. Smaller, windowless. Probably designed for meetings when things got ugly or uncomfortable. Fitting. He opened the door at the end and stepped aside, letting me in first. The room was cool, lined with wood shelves and a single table, already set with a thick folder. I sat down, more out of habit than fatigue. My body was awake, but my mind hadn't caught up yet. All I could hear was Marla's voice echoing from earlier. She doesn't even have a real job. Clive took the seat across from me and slid the folder forward. You'll want to keep these close, he said. They were meant for you, specifically. Everything your father didn't trust them with. I opened it. Inside were stapled packets and sealed envelopes. Neat, careful, organized in a way my father never was, at least not with me. I recognized my own handwriting on some of the receipts: emergency room invoices, pharmacy pickups, monthly statements from the care center he refused to live in. They were all there. The things I'd paid for without expecting payback, the charges I never mentioned at family dinners because I knew how that conversation would go. You volunteered, Avis. No one forced you. At the back of the folder was a sheet labeled Designation of Sole Medical Advocate, dated and signed 2 months before he died. Clive spoke softly. He didn't want anyone else involved in his care, Avis. He was very specific. I nodded, fingers still on the page. They'll say I isolated him. They already have, he replied. But this shows something different. This shows responsibility. I took a breath and leaned back. The silence between us felt less like tension now, and more like clarity. They always said I was the impulsive one, I murmured. Messy, soft, too emotional to handle anything serious. Clive folded his hands. And yet, you're the only one who kept everything. His words settled into me like bricks finding the floor. He reached into his briefcase once more, pulling out a leather-bound journal. Older, worn at the corners. I recognized it immediately. My father's. I hadn't seen it since I was a teenager. He left this for you, Clive said. Told me not to show it unless things got complicated. I took it gently, the leather warm in my hands. I opened it. The pages were uneven, messy, his handwriting slanted, sometimes almost unreadable. But there it was, page after page. Thoughts, observations. Some dated, some not. None of it edited. One entry stopped me cold. The ink had bled slightly from the way he'd pressed too hard. I told Marla she was brilliant because she needed it. I ignored Avis because I thought she didn't. I thought she was fine. Quiet meant fine. Turns out it meant she learned to disappear. Another entry, dated just a few weeks before he died. Avis has been here every day. I watch her unpack groceries like she's building something. She doesn't talk much, but I don't need her to explain anything. I see it now. She was never asking for recognition, just to be seen. I closed the journal and set it down. Not out of anger, not sadness either. Just wait. Recognition is heavier when it comes too late. Clive didn't press me to say anything more. He just sat, letting the moment settle. I gathered the folder and the journal, holding them to my chest as we stood. By the time I got home, the sun had dipped below the trees, and the streetlights were buzzing with that faint hum that only seems to exist in quiet neighborhoods. I placed the papers on the kitchen table, took a long sip of water, and stood in front of my blank canvas. It had hung there for months, more protest than art. I hadn't touched it because I wasn't sure what needed to go on it. But now, it wasn't about what others might see in it. I pulled out my brushes, found the box I'd labeled in Sharpie years ago. Proof I never needed but always kept. I opened it and slid the receipts inside, followed by the journal. Then I closed the lid and placed it on the shelf above the desk. Then, with slow, steady strokes, I painted over the canvas. Not to cover up what had never been created, but to begin something that finally was. I was rinsing brushes in the kitchen sink when the knock came. 3 firm raps, not aggressive, but official. I dried my hands, walked to the door, and opened it to find a courier holding a large envelope. Are you Avis DeLaura? I nodded. Signature, please. He handed me a tablet, barely made eye contact. I signed, took the envelope, and closed the door. Back at the table, I slid it open. The top sheet bore the seal of Chatham County Probate Court. Petition for conservatorship of financial affairs, it read. Filed by Verlette Mira and Marla Genevieve. My pulse slowed. Not sped up, slowed. The kind of stillness your body reaches when it knows it's about to be tested. I flipped through the rest. Pages of accusations, emotional instability, social isolation, signs of unresolved trauma, concerning behaviors following the death of Howard Elric. Clive picked up on the second ring. They filed this morning, he said. They're moving fast. Hearings in 6 days. Are they serious? They're not bluffing. They want your signature, your bank access, your say in everything. They want the power they think I don't deserve. He was quiet for a beat. They're not just coming after your inheritance, Avis. They're coming after your autonomy. The hearing was held in a side courtroom tucked into the back of the courthouse, smaller than the one for the will dispute. Fewer people, more tension. Verlette wore her usual polished armor, cream blazer, minimal jewelry, fake concern. Marla played the attentive daughter, head tilted, brows furrowed like she was carrying the weight of my decline on her own shoulders. Clive sat beside me, calm as ever. My hands rested on the table, empty. I didn't need to bring anything. I was the evidence. The judge, a woman named Ramona Skeldon, had a face carved by a career in law. She looked like someone who'd seen plenty of families tear each other apart and had stopped being surprised. Marla spoke first. "We're here because we love Avis," she began. "We're not trying to hurt her. We're trying to help. She's alone. She's grieving. She talks to herself, sometimes out loud in public. Her art has taken a darker turn. I worry. We worry." Verletta added, "She hasn't held steady employment in years. She's erratic, emotional, not in a dangerous way, just not in a stable one." Clive remained still. The judge turned to me. "Miss Delora, would you like to respond before we move to evidence?" I looked at Marla, then at my mother. "I'm sure this isn't about my art style, or my voice in public. It's about control and money." Objection. Marla's attorney tried to jump in. Judge Skeldon raised a hand. "She's allowed to speak." Clive slid a folder across the table. "Exhibits A through C, Your Honor," he said. "Bank statements, medical receipts, and a psychological evaluation from a licensed therapist. Miss Delora has no diagnosis that would disqualify her from managing her own affairs." Still, the judge asked me, "Have you experienced any mental trauma that you believe affects your current capacity?" I didn't hesitate. "I was 9, I said. Had a fever over 100. My teacher called home. No one answered. I stayed at school until the janitor found me crying in the break room. He called someone, can't even remember who. Eventually, a substitute teacher drove me home. I didn't eat dinner that night. I just sat in my room and realized, if I got sick again, I needed to keep it to myself." No one spoke. "That moment didn't break me," I continued, "but it shaped me. I learned how to function without being checked on." Verlette shifted in her seat. For once, no quip, no retort. I turned to face her and Marla fully. "You don't think I'm capable of managing money?" I asked, quieter now. I was capable enough to track every bill, every appointment, every medicine Dad needed. I buried him without help from either of you. I organized everything while you were busy drafting smear campaigns. Gasps echoed behind us. A few people shifted in the gallery. Judge Skeldon took off her glasses. Her eyes landed on Verlette first. "I've seen real instability," she said. "Emotional volatility, poor decision-making, paranoia. That's not what I see in Miss Delora. What I see is grief, processed quietly, but with clarity. She is not unfit, she's just alone." She signed the ruling. Petition denied. Outside the courtroom, I didn't speak to anyone. Not Clive. Not the reporters by the steps. I walked straight to my car. I sat behind the wheel and took one slow breath. They had tried to strip me of my name, my rights, and now, my mind. But I was still here, still me. 3 days passed without a word. No calls, no emails, no drama, just quiet. But in families like mine, silence was never surrender. It was a smokescreen. I was at Clive's office that Friday morning when his assistant knocked lightly and peeked in. "There's a call from the probate office, said it's urgent." Clive excused himself. I stayed seated, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup that had already started to bleed around the rim. I stared out the window as the azaleas bloomed along the courthouse lawn across the street. When he returned, his face said everything. They flagged a document. He dropped into his chair, hands steepled. During the conservatorship hearing, your mother and sister listed themselves as active fiduciary custodians over your father's estate. Problem is, there's no court record supporting that. I raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning they filed fraudulent documents, likely assumed no one would ever double-check. I leaned forward. How bad is it? Clive opened a file on his laptop and swiveled it toward me. They submitted this 2 weeks before your father passed. Backdated, unsigned by him, yet stamped by a clerk during a weekend rotation. It was slipped into the records like it belonged. My jaw tightened. They tried to legally take over his assets before he even died. They acted like the estate was theirs, Clive confirmed. But your father never authorized any of it. It's illegal, plain and simple. I folded my arms across my chest. So what's next? He paused, then opened a drawer in his desk. From it, he pulled a sealed envelope, thicker than anything I'd seen so far. The seal was already broken. The paper yellowed slightly around the edges. Your father left this with me the same day he revised his will. Told me to deliver it only if you were challenged unfairly. He handed it to me. I opened it slowly. Inside was a lawsuit, fully prepared, fully notarized, addressed to Verlette Mira and Marla Genevieve, filed on the grounds of financial misconduct, attempted fraudulent custodianship, and falsification of public documents. I flipped through the pages until I saw it. Dahlia Reeves' name, a signed affidavit. She had detailed the months leading up to his death, how I'd handled all his care, that no one else had shown up, that Verlette and Marla came only for photographs and convenient appearances. Clive's voice brought me back. The documents are airtight. It's not a matter of if we win. It's whether you want to press forward. I stared at the folder in my lap. What happens if we settle? They avoid court, keep their reputations intact, probably spin it into some kind of misunderstanding. I sat with the thought for a moment. Then I shook my head. No, I said. Let them stand in front of a judge and say it out loud. Let them explain under oath how they tried to erase me. Again. Clive nodded slowly. We'll file this morning. It didn't take long. By the time I left the office, the summons were already being delivered. I imagined Marla receiving hers in her driveway, still in yoga pants, coffee in hand. I imagined her smile falter for once. I imagined Verlette answering her door in pearls and panic. That night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't even mention it when Clive texted later to say the paperwork had been received. I stayed home, sitting at my kitchen table, going over every page of the lawsuit like it was a map. Not because I didn't trust Clive, but because I needed to see it with my own eyes, line by line, signature by signature, the paper trail of what they thought I wouldn't catch. They didn't know I paid attention, that I always had. They underestimated the quiet one. The morning of the trial arrived with no thunder, no sign, just a clear sky and the kind of quiet that settles over a town right before it's forced to choose sides. I woke before the alarm, dressed in black slacks and a simple blouse, and pulled my hair back into a low knot. Practical, presentable, unshakable. Clive picked me up at 8. He didn't ask if I slept. We both knew the answer. The courtroom wasn't packed, but it wasn't empty either. A few neighbors. A couple of local reporters pretending not to eavesdrop. No cameras, just faces. Observing, judging, waiting. Marla sat directly across from me, arms crossed, jaw tight. She didn't speak, but her expression did. It said, "You shouldn't be here." Verlette sat beside her, hands clasped neatly in her lap like she was attending a recital. She wore a brooch I recognized, a silver hummingbird I'd made her in 8th grade. I hadn't seen her wear it since. Judge Skeldon entered, adjusted her robe, and nodded toward Clive. He stood, as calm as ever, and opened with what felt less like a legal statement and more like a reckoning. This trial is not about bitterness. It's about boundaries. Not about inheritance, but intention. The defendants presented themselves as custodians, yet never earned that trust. My client didn't seek to own anything. She simply refused to be erased again. He sat. No dramatics. No flair. Verlette's attorney rose next. He launched into a practiced monologue about family confusion, miscommunications, and clerical misunderstandings. He painted Verlette as a devoted mother, Marla as an overwhelmed daughter, and me as a woman who had let grief twist her perceptions. She was emotionally fragile, he said. Grief can cloud judgment, make us believe in versions of events that don't reflect reality. I didn't flinch. Then it was Dahlia's turn. She walked to the stand in navy slacks and a white blouse, simple and clean, her hair pulled back like mine. She looked directly at the judge, never once at Verlette or Marla. I was Mr. Elric's in-home nurse for 8 months before he passed, she began. Miss Delora was there every day. She paid for everything out of pocket. She kept a log. She coordinated appointments. She even fixed a broken toilet herself when the landlord didn't respond. Laughter stirred in the gallery. Quiet but real. Dahlia continued. Marla came once, with a photographer. Verlette never showed up. Not for meals, not for doctor visits, not even in the final week. Marla's attorney objected, citing hearsay, but the judge allowed it. When Dahlia stepped down, Judge Skeldon turned to me. Miss Delora, would you like to speak before we review final statements? I stood. My voice didn't shake, not even once. I never asked for any of this. Not the house, not the money, not the judgment. I paused. What I wanted was simple. I wanted to be remembered, not as a nuisance or a mistake, but as a daughter. I took a breath and looked at them, my mother and sister. You claimed I was unstable, that I wasn't fit to manage the estate, or my own life. But I was the one who sat beside my father when he couldn't hold a spoon. I was the one who slept on a cot in his room. I was the one who stayed when his memory left him, and when it left me, too. Verlette looked away. Marla stared at the floor. I didn't stay because I had something to prove. I stayed because no one else did. The room was still when I finished. Judge Skeldon folded her hands. The court finds the documents presented by Verlette Myra and Marla Genevieve to be invalid and intentionally misleading. Miss Delora remains the rightful executor of Howard Elric's estate. She paused, then added, There will be no criminal charges, but let the public record reflect this misconduct clearly, for all who might be tempted to use grief as a cover for greed. The gavel sounded once. Final. Unmistakable. Outside, the air felt sharper. I walked down the courthouse steps, passing Marla and Verlette as they stood to the side. Neither of them spoke, but I did. You wanted the world to see me as unstable, I said, pausing just long enough for the words to settle. But now the world sees you. I didn't wait for their reactions. I didn't need them. That night, I didn't toast. I didn't post. I didn't tell anyone how it felt to be vindicated in front of strangers. I cleaned the kitchen. I made tea. I opened the last letter my father ever wrote me. After the kettle clicked off, I poured the hot water over a chamomile bag and sat at the kitchen table with the letter in my hands. The envelope was heavier than it should have been, like time had soaked into the paper, like silence had made it dense. To be opened when the noise stops. That's what he'd written on the front. Howard Elric's handwriting, all jagged edges and slanted loops. It was a familiar mess. I peeled it open slowly, careful not to rip it, and unfolded the single page inside. No date, no salutation, just words, raw, rambling, honest. I know by now you've read everything else, it began. The will, the journal, probably even the receipts. You always kept the pieces others didn't think mattered. I paused, thumb pressed against the edge of the paper, letting my eyes scan the next line before I could decide how I felt. I'm sorry I remembered everyone but you at the end. I forgot a lot of things, but I never forgot that you were there. Even when I didn't have the words for it. especially then. The room was quiet. No clocks ticking, no traffic outside, just the sound of my own breathing filling the space. He continued, scribbled but legible. I think about the mornings you made toast and left it on the edge of the tray, knowing I liked the crusts cut off but wouldn't say it out loud. I remember the time you rubbed my legs when they cramped up so bad I couldn't sleep. You didn't say anything, you just did it. You always just did it. I blinked hard, not from pain, not quite from sadness either, just release. I failed you, the letter read. Not in the loud ways people expect, not with shouting or abandonment, but in the quiet ways, the missed calls, the forgotten questions. I thought you didn't need much because you never asked. That was my mistake. I assumed silence meant strength. My hands loosened around the page. I could almost hear his voice, not the version from the video, or even from his last year, but the one from a long time ago. The one who used to hum when he built things in the garage. It's not just that I didn't give you what you earned, he'd written near the end, the ink faint where his hand must have shaken. It's that I didn't recognize what you were carrying. You were the one holding it all together. You always were. I folded the letter slowly and placed it in the box where I kept everything else. Journal, legal papers, receipts. I didn't seal it. Some things didn't need to be locked away anymore. I stood, stretched my back, and walked toward the living room where the easel still sat by the window. The canvas I'd been avoiding all week waited patiently, untouched, since the night I painted over it. This time, I didn't hesitate. I laid out my brushes, mixed the colors deliberately. Warm tones, soft lines, not abstract, not distant. This time, I painted a face. Mine. Not a self-portrait in the traditional sense. There was no exact likeness. But the shape of the shoulders, the light in the eyes, the stillness in the mouth. It was me. The version I'd spent years hiding behind everyone else's definition of who I was supposed to be. Not the forgotten daughter, not the problem, not the one who left, or was left. Just me. When it dried, I didn't frame it. I hung it just as it was, canvas exposed, rough around the edges. But it was whole, and it was mine. I stepped back and looked at the wall. The space that once held empty frames and cracked glass now held something full, something honest. They erased me from the records, I whispered aloud, as if saying it one last time made it real. But I've reclaimed something they never owned. It wasn't about being written into a will, or spoken of in polite conversation. It was about knowing, finally, that I had always belonged, even when no one handed me proof. And for once, I didn't need a frame to know I belonged in the picture. Before I let you go, I want to leave you with something from my heart. Not as a daughter, not as someone who fought for justice, but as a person who survived being overlooked. Sometimes the deepest scars are the ones no one else sees. Not because they're hidden, but because no one ever bothered to look. I spent years believing I needed permission to exist in the spaces I helped build, waiting for someone to say, "You belong here." But the truth is, you don't need a frame to prove your worth. Not in a family photo, not in a boardroom, not in life. If you've ever felt invisible, in your family, in your job, in your marriage, I want you to know that being quiet does not mean being weak, and being left out does not mean you are without value. You have every right to take up space, speak up, and reclaim your story, even if it means standing alone to do it. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been the one who stayed quiet too long? Were you ever written out of your own family's story? Or maybe you've fought to be seen and won. Share your experience in the comments. Let's talk about it. Let's learn from one another. And hey, if this story moved you, if it touched something in your heart, drop a 1 in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, city, state, country. Or if you didn't like this story, tell me why. I'm always open to listening. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. If you want more stories like this, honest, emotional, and real, this is the place. We have so much more to talk about, and your voice matters here. Thanks for listening. I see you, and I'm glad you're here. Hi, I'm Vivian. My sister told me to just send a gift and skip her wedding, like I was a coworker, not her blood. No phone call, no explanation, just a link to a live stream and silence. But that message wasn't the beginning, it was the final proof. For years, I planned her events, paid her invoices, stood behind the camera, only to be cropped from every frame. Until I erased the guest list. Every single name. But how do you know when your own family is writing you out on purpose? And what happens when you finally write yourself out? First, the first time I read the message, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe she sent it to the wrong person. Maybe she was in a rush and meant to follow up with a call. But as I sat at my kitchen table, the screen still glowing in my hand, I knew better. My sister doesn't make mistakes like that. She makes statements. Just send your gift. No need to show up. That was it. No, hi Vivian. No, hope you're doing okay. No explanation, just that one line. It felt less like an invitation and more like a closure. A door clicking shut from the other side. Outside, the light was starting to slip away behind the neighbor's oak trees. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon. I had meant to bake something earlier, but never got around to it. Now, the half-measured sugar and untouched eggs felt ridiculous sitting on the counter, like props in a life I wasn't invited to finish. I didn't reply. Not right away. I stared at the message so long I started to memorize the pixels. Every word burned into my mind like a scar I wasn't expecting, but wasn't surprised by either. This wasn't new. This wasn't even shocking. It was just louder than before. The next morning, I found the envelope wedged awkwardly between a coupon booklet and some real estate flyer. Cream-colored with rose gold lettering. The kind of thing brides pick out months in advance. I knew that because I helped her choose the samples. Before I was uninvited. It was addressed to Marie Kalin. Wrong middle name. Wrong spelling of my last name. The zip code was from an apartment I left 5 years ago. I stood there at the mailbox, fingers frozen around the paper, while a neighbor's kid screamed from across the street about losing their soccer ball. Somehow that voice felt more personal than the envelope in my hand. Back inside, I sat on the couch and opened it. The design was beautiful, minimal, elegant, cold, just like her. The RSVP card was already filled in live stream, link to follow. They didn't even give me the choice to decline. I could have called her. I could have asked what happened, what I did. But what would I be asking for, really? An apology I already knew she didn't think I deserved? A seat at a table she had no intention of setting for me? So I said nothing. I didn't forward the message to Mom. I didn't vent in the group chat. I just let the silence wrap around me like a familiar coat. Not warm, but known. Later that day, I walked past the hall closet and caught sight of the shoebox where I kept old holiday cards. One of them was from Seraphine, Christmas, maybe 6 years ago. A generic Hallmark line, and her name scribbled with a heart. No personal note, no real feeling, just her usual signature performance of closeness. I left the box closed. Instead, I found myself scrolling back through moments I hadn't thought of in a long time. The time I covered her half of the rent during her first year out of college, and she posted a thank you to the universe. The time she borrowed my car and returned it empty on a Monday morning. The time I threw her a birthday brunch, and she tagged every guest in the photo except me. And still, I came back. I always did. Like the guest star who didn't realize she wasn't part of the cast anymore. By the time the sun had dipped fully behind the trees, I was sitting with a cold cup of tea and a note I'd written to myself months ago taped to the fridge. Do not make this about them. I laughed at it, no dry, humorless. What was I making it about then? Myself? Finally, I opened my planner. The flight info was still there. Austin to Santa Barbara, Friday morning. Hotel check-in, gift delivery window, all lined up with neat little checkboxes. I deleted each one. Then I opened the wedding file on my laptop. I had kept it for reference, the budget sheet. vendor contacts, sample designs. I didn't delete anything, but I moved it to a folder labeled Archived. Just seeing it disappear from my desktop gave me a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The last thing I did that night was slip the wedding invitation back into its envelope. I sealed it. Not to send, but to close. Because sometimes you don't need to yell to walk away. Sometimes you just stop showing up. I didn't cry that night. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed, back straight, laptop open, and downloaded every document with my name on it and every file that used it without giving me credit. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just awake in a way I hadn't been in a long time. 2 days later, I flew to Santa Barbara. The ticket was already paid for, and at that point, showing up felt less like support and more like reconnaissance. I landed in the late afternoon and headed straight to the hotel. The air smelled expensive lavender and glass and money. I didn't recognize my own reflection in the polished doors. I was underdressed, not by mistake, but because no one had told me the dress code had changed. At the check-in table, the event coordinator smiled politely, tapped on her iPad, and frowned. "You're not on the main list," she said. "Try the service entrance down the side hall. There's a second check-in there." I didn't argue. I just nodded and walked. That hallway smelled like floor polish and steamed vegetables. A staff member held the door for me with a quick, "You catering?" I stepped into the ballroom through a side curtain. Chandeliers sparkled overhead. Tables gleamed with gold trim. I scanned for mine. Table 18. Far corner, behind a structural column, beside the restroom. Close enough to hear the hand dryer. I found my name misspelled again, next to a stranger's. As I pulled my chair back, a woman sitting across the table looked up and said, "Oh, I thought you were with the staff." I smiled barely. "No, just a guest," I replied, though the word felt like a costume that didn't quite fit. I glanced across the room. My cousins, who hadn't seen Seraphine in years, sat near the dance floor. Seraphine's yoga instructor was at the head table. I counted 8 people closer to the mic than me, who'd never seen her cry or fail or manipulate. The program began. Toasts, laughter, clinking glasses. Seraphine stood, beaming in white silk. "I just want to thank everyone who made this day possible," she said. "Especially my sister. For the diamond bracelet, she knows which one." Every head turned. A ripple of "oh wow" and "must be nice" passed across the tables. I didn't raise my glass. I didn't move. She never asked me if she could mention it, never warned me she'd make it a spectacle. I felt like I'd been stripped and paraded in front of people who didn't know a thing about me, except that I apparently had money to burn. The slideshow followed, a montage of photos and designs. The color palette? Mine. The table cards? My handwriting? The logo projected behind the stage? I'd sketched it 6 months ago, but every credit read "Our amazing wedding team." Rowena, seated 2 chairs over, leaned in and whispered, "They're really running with your stuff, huh?" I didn't look at her. I just said, "They always do." The evening dragged. No one came to my table unless I waved them down. I declined dessert. The chocolate souffle looked lovely, but I couldn't taste anything past the ache in my throat. I kept my smile small, polite, something a guest might wear. When it was finally over, I pushed my chair back and walked out without saying goodbye. My coat was thin in the night air, but I kept my hands in my pockets. The valet stand was buzzing with conversation and flashing ticket stubs. I gave my name. They had no record. "Do you remember who dropped off your car, miss?" I had. Of course I had. I remembered handing my keys to a teenager in a maroon vest with too much cologne. But there was no proof now, no record, no entry, just like the guest list. I waited on the curb in silence while they searched. My phone buzzed with a notification from Seraphine's wedding app. "Don't forget to tag your photos." I wanted to laugh. Instead, I stared at the screen until it dimmed and the reflection looking back at me faded. Back at the Airbnb, I slipped my shoes off without unbuckling them. Just kicked them into the corner, like I couldn't bear another second of pretending they fit the evening. My coat followed. then my necklace. Piece by piece, I shed what little armor I had brought with me. I poured a glass of wine I didn't want, left it on the counter. The room smelled faintly of lavender from the detergent the hosts used on their towels. It was the only thing soft about the night. I sat on the couch, letting the silence surround me. I didn't need noise. I had a highlight reel playing in my head, the sideways glances, the forced smiles, the way Seraphine hadn't looked at me once. Not even when she thanked me in front of everyone for the bracelet. Table 18. The bathroom door swinging open and closed beside us. The woman who asked if I was staff. The slideshow. The slideshow. A month ago, Seraphine had promised me I could say a few words on behalf of Dad. She said it so casually, I almost didn't take it seriously. But I'd written the speech. Rehearsed it in my head more times than I'd admit. When the MC called Rowena to the mic, I didn't move. Just kept chewing my salad that had long since gone soggy. Rowena smiled, fake sincere, and read some fluff about sisterhood and chosen family. It was polished, generic, and not mine. I wasn't overlooked. I was replaced. That distinction matters. After the lights dimmed and the slideshow started, I kept my expression still. I knew every color combination on the screen. I had spent hours agonizing over whether peach was too washed out for a late spring wedding. I knew the font for the menus, the layout of the name cards, even the loop timing on the final logo animation. And yet, every frame was tagged Wedding Team. No names, no credits, no trace of me. I leaned slightly toward Rowena, who was scrolling her phone under the table. I designed that logo, I said without looking at her. She glanced up. They're really running with your stuff, huh? They always do. I left before dessert was served. The valets had sorted out the car issue by then. Apparently, my name had been entered under service vendor Vivian Events. Not even a real company. Back at the Airbnb, I didn't change out of my dress right away. I sat down at the small desk by the window and opened my laptop. The battery was low, but it had enough juice to get through what I needed. I pulled up the shared Google Drive folder for the wedding. I had access to nearly everything. Seraphine never removed me as a collaborator, probably out of habit more than trust. I opened the logistics sheet first. My name was misspelled. Again. Maurice Calum. As if I were some distant uncle no one really knew. I clicked over to the design deck. No attribution. None of the pages even hinted I'd touched them. Then the final insult photos from that evening, already being uploaded. There was a group shot from the welcome line. My shoulder made it into the edge of the frame, cropped. Another from the balcony toast, everyone else holding a glass. My arm half visible behind a floral arrangement. That wasn't an accident. That was a language. It reminded me of a dinner years ago. Summer, backyard. I had just gotten promoted at work and brought the plaque to show Mom and Seraphine. Silly, I know, like I was back in grade school with a spelling bee ribbon. I barely got the words out before Mom asked Seraphine if she was still planning to go back to school for hair design. I had laughed then. I even made a joke about my ugly frame and how I should just leave it in the car next time. But I never brought anything to show after that. Now, staring at the screen, I understood the shape of their silence. It wasn't cold. It was precise, designed. So I started downloading. Every document I had submitted, every logo file, floral reference image, budget sheet, anything with my fingerprint on it, I copied into a folder titled, In Case They Forget Again. Then I opened a blank note. I didn't write anything yet. Just watched the cursor blink. I wasn't ready to burn the whole thing down. Not yet. But I had finally stopped pretending I wasn't already standing outside the fire. I didn't sleep much that night. Just kept the light on, laptop open, cursor blinking over an empty file name like it might eventually suggest one. By morning, I still hadn't typed anything, but the decision was made. Quietly, firmly. The hotel lobby was already humming by the time I arrived. People wheeled in carts of florals, stacks of centerpieces, crates labeled ceremony detail fragile. I moved through it like a shadow. I still had the flower samples and printed decor specs to drop offies. I was still doing my part. Habit is hard to kill, even when dignity's on the line. I found Seraphine at the far end of the ballroom, camera crew circling her like she was on the cover of a magazine shoot. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did and chose not to. I hovered near the assistant coordinator and handed off the samples. Before I could step back, the photographer looked up and asked, "Are you with media or event staff?" I smiled faintly. "Neither." He nodded, then turned away. The bridal party lined up for a group shot near the archway. They laughed. Someone adjusted Seraphine's veil. I waited for anyone to say, "Get Vivian in one," but no one did. I stepped back, into the corner, out of frame, out of expectation. Later, while refilling water at the back table, I glanced at the TikTok team's laptop. A preview reel was playing clips of the bride laughing, hugging relatives, clinking glasses with vendors. I saw myself once, mid-step, obscured by a floral column. The editor pointed at the frame and said, "We'll crop that for symmetry." I didn't say a word, but I heard the thought echo, as familiar as it was final. They've been cropping me for years, just never with software. At lunch, I overheard Seraphine and Rowena finalizing the seating layout. My name didn't come up. Neither of them looked my way. I sat down beside a cooler and sipped a flat bottle of Sprite like it was something important to do. Eventually, I approached Rowena while she was sorting name tags. "Am I still at table 18?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She blinked, surprised it asked. "I think so." "I'm not sure. Actually, Seraphine wanted to keep things fluid." "Right." "Fluid," I said. "That's one way to avoid committing to anything." She gave a tight laugh and busied her hands. It wasn't guilt, it was discomfort. Later, we found ourselves in the same hallway while waiting for Seraphine to wrap a call. The buzz of preparations softened. Just enough space for truth to slip in. Rowena cleared her throat. She said she hesitated. She said if you were in too many of the main shots, you'd pull focus. I didn't react. Not right away. I just let the words hang between us like wet clothes too heavy to move. Focus. That was the word she chose. Not disrupt, not distract. Pull focus. As if my mere presence bent the light away from her. "And what did you say?" I asked, voice level. Rowena looked down. I didn't know what to say. Of course she didn't. That was the role she'd signed up for: neutral ground. Comfortable silence. Convenient alliance. I didn't speak again. Just walked back to the guest prep area, retrieved my laptop bag, and left. Back at the Airbnb, I didn't cry. That part of me felt long gone. Instead, I spread out my documents on the kitchen table. Invoices, logo drafts, table layout suggestions, vendor referrals. One by one, I ran them through a watermarking app. My name, my work, my proof. I created a backup folder, labeling it cleanly, in case they forget again. I didn't call it revenge. I called it insurance. Then I opened the digital guest list, just hovered over it. Nothing more. But that night, for the first time, I stopped asking myself what I had done to deserve being left out, and started asking what they had done to earn my presence in the first place. By the time I woke up the next morning, I knew better than to expect repair. I checked my phone, not for apologies. Those were a luxury long extinct in my family, but out of habit. A forwarded message sat unread from a college friend I hadn't spoken to in over a year. The subject line read, "You're in this, right?" It was a link to a feature on a popular wedding blog. A full spread about Seraphine's DIY dream wedding, filled with pastel tones and polished phrases. She was quoted saying, "I planned every detail myself. I didn't want to burden anyone. I wanted this to reflect my vision entirely." My name was nowhere in the piece. No mention of the designs, the sourcing, the weeks I spent compiling vendor lists she never thanked me for. I didn't blink. I didn't reread it. I downloaded the article as a PDF and filed it away. Not for keepsake, just to have it saved in case anyone tried to gaslight me later. That was my reality now. Archiving proof of the erasure. Later that morning, I got dressed and walked to the venue. I held the gift bag in one hand, plain white with a simple satin ribbon. Inside was the pendant I'd commissioned, a custom redesign of Nena's brochure grandmother. I'd paid extra to have it engraved, discreetly, with a line only Seraphine would recognize. I didn't include a card. At the check-in table, the assistant coordinator barely looked up. "You can leave it here," she mumbled, motioning toward a cluster of gifts stacked in no order, no care. I placed it down and turned to leave. Nobody stopped me. No one offered a thank you. I was invisible again, but this time I let it be intentional. I didn't return to my Airbnb right away. Instead, I walked down to the garden patio near the ballroom entrance, where my mother sat alone with a cup of coffee, scrolling her phone like nothing in the world could touch her. I sat across from her. She looked up, blinked, and offered a smile like a cashier trained to say, "Have a nice day, no matter what." "You look tired," she said. "I am," I replied. I read the article. She knew what I meant. She didn't deny it. She just sighed and said, "Sweetheart, Seraphine has always been more fragile than you. You know that. She needs this, that line, that tired line, the one that's been my mother's fallback for as long as I've had memories." "When exactly do I get to need something?" I asked, not raising my voice. "When do I get to matter without pretending I don't?" She didn't answer, just took a slow sip of her drink and looked past me, toward the event tent being set up with delicate string lights and rented chairs. That was our pattern, she dismissed. I digested. But this time, I didn't sit there and let the moment dissolve. I stood up. "You've chosen her over me every time, and I let you. But don't be surprised when I stop showing up to be left out." Before she could formulate a response, I walked off. Inside the venue hallway, I caught Rowena near the programs table. She looked startled to see me, probably still reeling from the passive-aggressive brunch she had to moderate earlier. I didn't wait for pleasantries. "If my name disappears again," I said, "I'll take back everything attached to it." Her eyes widened. "Vivian, come on! You wouldn't ruin her wedding over this ego stuff." I smiled without warmth. I wouldn't ruin anything. I just stopped pretending I wasn't already erased. She didn't have a comeback. Just shifted uncomfortably and nodded like someone unsure if they were speaking to a friend or a threat. Back at the Airbnb, I powered up my laptop and opened every folder, reviewed every contract, checked every document that carried my name watermarked, dated, backed up. Then I opened the master guest list, the one Seraphine never thought to restrict access to. I didn't touch it, not yet. I simply changed one small thing, my permission level. Owner. By the time they realized I meant every word, I was long gone. Gone from the hotel. Gone from the role they kept shoving me into. I had already logged into the back-end system, and this time, I wasn't cleaning up anyone else's mess. I didn't wait for the evening's charade to begin. No sunset, no violins, no fake smiles under candlelight. I arrived while the afternoon light still slanted through the tall windows, painting the carpet in gold and shadow. The ballroom buzzed with frantic activity, staff in black uniforms wheeled carts of champagne flutes. Florists were still fiddling with blooms. Someone barked directions about the lighting rig. I kept my head steady, my eyes clear. I wore a simple navy wrap dress, chosen not for glamour, but for movement, efficiency. I could slip into any corner, pass through any door unnoticed, and apparently I did. A young man in a black vest spotted me from across the room. He didn't really look at me, just saw a woman in a plain dress and made an assumption. "Could you move that tray to the other side?" I stared at him for a breath. And then I moved it. Not out of obedience, not even out of sarcasm, but because there's something oddly liberating about letting people mislabel you. Again. Still, they only see what they think you are, and they never see you when they've already decided you're no one. I made my way to the back of the ballroom, where the tech table sat, where the montage for the wedding reception was queued up and ready to run. That montage had been a labor of love. I'd snuck in a video. Short, simple. Just a few kind words from me, in case no one remembered to offer me the mic. A gentle nod to our father. No spotlight, just something meaningful. But when I checked the screen, it was gone. I felt it before I confirmed it. That slow, rising cold in your chest when something important is missing, and you already know who took it. I pulled out my phone and opened the shared folder from the planning drive. I scrolled. Nothing. No trace of the video file, not even in the trash. Then I checked the version history. Last accessed by Rowena. There it was. The casual cruelty of a perfectly composed digital paper trail. A message from her in the project chat. We had to clean things up for Flo. Flo. That shiny word they use when they're too cowardly to say you don't belong. I closed the app, walked calmly out to the bar area just beyond the reception entrance. There she was, Rowena in full command mode, flipping through her clipboard, chatting with the DJ about cue points and entrances, eyes gleaming with perfectionist pride. I didn't wait. So now I'm too messy to include? I said. She blinked. What? My video. You deleted it. She stiffened slightly, tried to keep her voice breezy. It's not personal, Vivian. It's about cohesion. No, I said evenly. It's about control. You don't get to rewrite this without consequences. If cohesion means cutting people out, don't be shocked when the thread you trimmed turns out to be holding everything together. She looked around for backup. There was none. I left her standing there. Back at the Airbnb, I peeled off the dress and washed the cold residue of the day from my face. I sat at the little wooden desk I'd used all week, the one overlooking the alley behind the building. The laptop booted up like it always did. The guest list spreadsheet popped up first, like a ghost still waiting for me to serve it. I didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, I opened everything else, every planning file, every vendor contract, every signed agreement I had coordinated, scanned receipts, permits, schedules. I created a new folder titled, For When Enough is Enough. I backed it all up, encrypted it, then copied it again to an external drive. They wanted to treat me like an extra chair in an overbooked venue? Fine, but I still held the key to every single exit. Then I opened my email client and typed one sentence. I warned you not to erase me. Now I'll show you what it feels like. I scheduled it for 7:00 right before the first bridal hair appointment and just before the ceremony's final call. I stood up, crossed the room, and opened the closet. No dress, just a pair of soft jeans, a clean blouse, comfortable walking shoes, neutral tones, clothes not for celebration but for liberation. I laid them out neatly, like armor. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and let the breath leave me all the way out. No more rehearsals, no more restraint. They'd removed me from the story. But they forgot. I was the one holding the pen. I woke up before the sun, before traffic, before even the pigeons outside the Airbnb window began their morning squabble. The kind of silence that fills a room with clarity before the day starts demanding things from you. I didn't rush for my phone. I let the stillness linger, walked barefoot to the kitchen, brewed coffee I wouldn't drink, and opened the curtains as if I owned the city. Then I opened the planner email. Subject line, Final VIP Access Schedule Wedding Day. I blinked, scrolled again. My name wasn't there. No call time, no badge, no entry credential, nothing. I opened the group chat from the rehearsal team. The itinerary was pinned at the top. Everyone had a designated role driver pickups, timing blocks, point persons. Everyone had a handler. Except me. Even the rideshare schedule had been updated. New cars, new passengers. I wasn't on any list. No one had texted. No one had asked where I'd be. It was like I had never existed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I let out a breathless laugh, one of those hollow, tired ones. The kind of laugh you let slip when something finally confirms what you already knew, but weren't ready to admit. Still, I got dressed. Jeans, a soft, loose blouse. Nothing close to festive. Just enough to pass through the city unnoticed. I slipped a small gift bag into my hand, the only piece I hadn't delivered early. Inside, Nana's brooch, redesigned into a necklace. One of a kind, meaningful, until now. I considered keeping it, just walking away with the last piece of what I gave. but a part of me knew she wouldn't notice or care. Not unless someone was watching. At the venue, I walked past the flower arch I had designed. The bridal coordinator barely glanced at me. "Vendor check-in?" she asked absently. I set the gift bag down. "I'll be watching from the room," I said. She didn't ask my name. Just nodded, already turning back to her clipboard. Just another worker bee. That moment crystallized something. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about refusing to be erased quietly. Not anymore. Back at the Airbnb, I opened my laptop. The live stream had started, buffering slowly. I didn't plan to watch the whole thing, just long enough to confirm the time. And then I saw her. Seraphine, framed perfectly beneath the floral lattice I had recommended 6 months ago, her gown glittering like a bridal commercial. She lifted something delicately in her Honda pendant. The pendant. My pendant. The redesign I had spent 3 weeks perfecting. She smiled at the camera. "A gift from my future mother-in-law," she said sweetly. So thoughtful. Below her name, the stream overlay read, "Gift from the Adler family." I didn't flinch, didn't gasp. Just quietly closed the tab. It wasn't about the gift. It was that she knew. She knew it wasn't theirs to give. This wasn't a mistake. This was revision. A calculated exclusion. I opened the planning folder again. Everything was still there, still unlocked. Like a manual for my own disappearance. No mention of me on the VIP list. No credits. No slide acknowledging my help. The digital seating chart archived by the planning team included third cousins I'd never met, her college roommate's new boyfriend, and the mailman who apparently loaned his truck for decor transport. Everyone but me. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was design. I opened the hidden folder I'd created 2 days earlier. I'd known this was coming, I just didn't know how far she'd go. Inside, PDFs of every signed vendor agreement, logo drafts, email threads, budget notes, invoices with my name, every submission watermarked, quiet receipts of my presence. I started drafting an email, clean, professional, just enough to remind them I held the blueprint. Subject, timeline breach, intellectual removal, notice pending. Attachments, logo.psd, layout, final.pdf, vendor, referrals, JXLSX. But I didn't send it. Instead, I opened the master guest list, the real one, the one they thought no one else had access to, and I started clicking. One by one, I erased them. Not the family, not Seraphine. I didn't touch her name. I removed the fringe, the people who smiled politely and whispered privately, the influencers, the yoga buddies, the co-workers who showed up for the wine, not the vows, the relatives who had called me jealous for stepping back. Click, click. Gone. Not loudly, just removed. She wanted an audience more than she wanted me? Fine. Now she'd have neither. I didn't leave to win. I left to stop losing pieces of myself. The sun hadn't even cracked the edge of the sea when I stepped out onto the quiet street. There was something sacred about being up before the world had a chance to speak. I walked toward the coast without a plan, hands in my jacket pockets, heart beating steady, not fast. Not calm. Just sure. Tucked inside the left pocket was an envelope, sealed the night before. Inside, a printed copy of every agreement I'd signed, every email confirming services under my name. I'd printed them in silence, hole-punched, and labeled them like I used to do in high school debate prep. At the back of the folder was a simple typed note. Funding rescinded due to erasure of contributor. See attached. I didn't feel angry, not anymore. I felt ready. On the terrace near the ballroom, I saw her, Aunt Odile. She was sipping her tea alone, cross-legged like she always sat, even when chairs weren't made for it. I hadn't seen her since she arrived, and somehow she didn't look surprised to see me. She nodded toward the seat beside her. I sat down. "They can pretend all they want," she said gently, without looking at me. "But I see you. You built this." I didn't answer. I couldn't. She reached into her coat pocket and pressed something into my palm. It was an old photom and Dad, standing at the edge of his garden. I couldn't have been more than 12. On the back, in his faded script, "Let them talk. You just keep growing." I swallowed the ache, folded the photo into my wallet without a word. Back in the room, I didn't hesitate. I opened the laptop, logged into the admin dashboard of the event system, and pulled up the master guest list. Every table, every name, every assigned code and dietary note. I selected all, clicked remove, confirmed. Then I drafted the auto message. "Due to breach of terms, guest access has been revoked. Please contact your event lead for clarification." I clicked activate. It pulsed once, then went still. Downstairs, the ripple began within minutes. Sabine, the planner, was the first to notice. I had left her the envelope with the documents at the registration table. I watched from the parking lot across the street as she opened it, brows knitting slowly, then fully furrowed. She looked around, lips pressed tight, then pulled out her phone. Inside the ballroom, things fell apart in quiet bursts. iPads flashed error codes. Table checklists disappeared. Guest names blinked out like lights in a storm. By the time Seraphine realized something was wrong, she was halfway through lipstick application, a camera crew waiting for their cue. I imagined her confusion, her voice rising. "What do you mean the list is gone?" I imagined her scanning the room, searching for someone to fix it, to blame. She wouldn't find me, because I wasn't there. By then, I had already checked out. Bags packed, keys returned. I was in the back of a car heading to Santa Ynez, an old vineyard inn I'd stayed at once years ago. No one knew the address, no one asked. I didn't check my phone. I didn't watch the ceremony unravel. But I knew in the weight of my breath, in the exhale that didn't catch halfway through my chest, in the stillness of my spine as I leaned back against the car seat. They built it on silence, and I finally made silence loud enough to tear it down. 2 days later, the morning light in Santa Ynez came in soft through the linen curtains. It touched everything gently, my notebook on the table, the ceramic cup of half-drunk tea, the leather strap of my watch resting in the shape of my wrist. I didn't rush to check my phone. When I finally did, it lit up with a stream of missed calls. Seraphine, Rowena, an unknown number, with a Los Angeles area code. I let them sit there. Instead, I walked into town and found a bakery tucked between a wine shop and an antique bookstore. I ordered something I didn't need and sat by the window, pen in hand, writing nothing in particular. Just lines that didn't need to become anything more than what they were, thoughts that belonged to me. Around mid-morning, I got a message forwarded from an old co-worker. A screenshot. Seraphine had posted on Instagram. The caption read, "Sometimes people walk away when you need them most. But love wins." The comments were turned off. No wedding photos were shared. Just a blurry image of her bouquet and the back of someone's head, maybe the planner, maybe a stand-in. The wedding blogs ran short headlines. Unforeseen vendor issues. Disrupt wedding of influencer Seraphine Adler. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't screenshot it. I didn't send it to anyone. I just sipped my coffee and turned the page in my notebook. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. "Vivian!" Odil's voice came softly. "Do you feel lighter?" I thought about it. About the silence that had followed the storm. About the stillness in my body. About the absence of the ache I had carried for years and mistaken for love. "I feel clean," I said. She paused, then offered only this. "That's what the truth does. It doesn't shout. It clears." I stayed on the line for another few seconds, hearing her breathe on the other end like a tether that didn't bind, only steadied. That afternoon, I finally opened the envelope she had given me days before. Inside was the photo. Me and Dad, standing in his backyard garden, his arm draped around my shoulder, like I was the only thing that had ever grown straight in that place. On the back, his handwriting read, "You see more than anyone. One day, they'll need you to remind them what was real." I found a frame in the lobby gift shop. Nothing fancy, but solid wood. Real. I didn't frame it to dwell in the wound. I framed it because sometimes Remembering is not about staying in the pain, it's about reclaiming the version of you that never needed anyone's permission to exist. Back in the room, I logged out of the shared drive. I composed a short email to Sabine, the planner. Please remove my credentials and archive my contributions. I'm stepping away permanently. No signature, no flourish. Then I opened a blank canvas in my design software. Not for a logo, not for anyone else's wedding. Just a brand concept. Clean lines, muted tones. Something for a business idea that had been sitting in the back of my head for years, but never had space to breathe. A business that had nothing to do with being the helpful sister, the fixer, the fallback. I didn't need a launch party. I didn't need applause. I needed to know that this chapter of my life closed not with a scream, but with a decision. Because some endings don't come with closure. Some endings come with a clean line drawn in your own hand. And walking away isn't always about anger. Sometimes it's just about choosing to protect what's left of you.